Hi, folks. This is a developmental psychology mini lecture, and it will concern young adulthood. Before I start this video, I want to tell you that I miss being in the classroom, and I miss seeing your faces. I miss hearing your questions. I miss all of that, and I wish this was different, but this is the way the cards have been dealt, and so we will play them. All right. So, as always, if you need to communicate with me, go through rwedemeyer@rose.edu, please. All right. So, young adulthood. This is sometimes called emerging adulthood. I know that when I was 19, 20, 21, I was convinced I was a full-fledged adult, and chronologically that may be true, and social mores and laws would tell us that that's an adult period, but there are some things we have to learn yet, and I hope to communicate these to you that would signal that we are actually in a true stage of adulthood. A lot of that concerns the way we conduct our own lives and the way we go about doing relationships with others. Okay, so this age stage starts somewhere, 22, 24, somewhere in there. Depends on who you read and what texts you look at and those sorts of things. It goes to about the mid-30s. This is a time that has a number of interesting and new characteristics, one of which is that emotional age and emotional age and emotional maturity can be very different from one person to another. And it varies differently with, obviously, physical development, which is on board in full ways by 18, 19, 20. So we have a peaking of biological abilities around 25. So things like hand-eye coordination, 25, and so on. You get a long list for those things. But what you start to see is a new way to understand the way in which we can conduct ourselves in the social contexts that surround us, in the interpersonal, more familiar contexts of our lives, and the way we understand who we are internally. So there are some physical changes for the better, and then a plateauing around late 20s, early 30s. It's almost imperceptible that it's a plateau. It's a gently declining plateau. It's almost imperceptible. You don't really see it until late 30s, early 40s, and then you notice it more. There are also some cognitive changes with respect to the development of the abilities to learn certain things and retain certain things. So there are differences there. We'll talk about those. So if you haven't watched 21 Up in America, or 21 in America, I guess is what they're calling it, please watch that. Just Google it, and I think Vimeo has a recording of that. Please watch that. You'll see many of the people that we've seen at 7 and 14, and you'll get a real chance to look at the differences that across the 7 years from 14 to 21 provide us. Okay, so what are some of the challenges here? Well, the challenges include things like our increased need for closeness and confidentiality, trust building, in other words. The substitute for our parents and family of origin for a family of our own choice, and friends that now sort of supplant the kinds of things, the connections that we had with our primary family. Okay, so for many people in this age stage, and you are very likely to be in this age stage or soon to be in it, for many of you, it's a time to really be on your own and manage your own affairs. Economical independence is hard. For many becomes more common. And the average person is pretty healthy and pretty full of energy. I can't tell you how much I missed those years. Now, because of economic difficulties, primarily, we sometimes have what others have called a prolonged adolescence, or maybe a tryout 20s. Some people call this the boomerang generation, where you might go out on your own if you can and try out and see how that is, and then discover that it's very difficult to do, and you come back and live with your family of origin. Some people don't leave home because they simply can't arrange that. Nowadays, the cost of living in an apartment or a house is just outrageous, and you'd have to live with other people, and many people do that, of course. But this is a difficult task. So they may stay at home and build up some savings, have a job outside the home, and so forth and so on. Begin to transition. So what we're really talking about here, this is the key to this stage, is developing an awareness of the dynamic balance between interdependence and independent identity. So we're gleaning a deeper sense of our independent identity, who we are, what our core values are, and to live by those, and allowing that to generate healthier relationships with other people. Okay, that's the interdependent part. Okay, there's a dynamic here. I want to be myself, be on my own, be who I am, not need anybody, which is a cultural value, of course, in an individualistic culture like ours. And in dynamic balance with that is the interdependence thing. How do I connect with other people while still maintaining my sense of independence and separateness? This takes a while to figure out. Okay, so some of the physical changes that are encountered are maybe early signs of hair loss, decreasing metabolism as you get into the early 30s, start getting your first wrinkles. And some of these changes are more salient if you don't maintain physical activity. The worst thing you can do is not move. So fluid cognitive ability peaks in the 20s and then declines probably around 30 or so. That's the slowing of the reflexes, which are highest in the mid-20s. Processing speed and working memories begin to slide a little bit. But crystallized intelligence, the things you know and the things you know how to do, they are less affected by aging. In fact, crystallized intelligence can actually be improved as you get older, should you be able to increase your cognitive exercise, taking courses, reading, and so on, attending cultural events, doing things with your brain. All right. So part of this is developing a comfortableness and competence being alone. I am my own person, but developing a connection to others. This is a big deal. Now, some of this is connected to your economic condition, which in turn has to do with the jobs you take and the career path you make. This is interesting. There's a lot of research on this, and what we basically want to say is that the more awareness you have of how you are in the world, your values, and how to operate within those values, making decisions based on your core values, the more you do that, the more you have an awareness of that, and the better you are able to structure what you do, your work and your career choices, that align well with those awarenesses, the better you're going to do. You won't get as burned out. You're not at the same level of risk of being burned out at a position you might take. So this is really critical. So people who know themselves well, they know their good parts, their bad parts, their skills, their things they're working on, things they need to work on, for sure. And everybody's like that, isn't it? That they have those parts. And the more that you can be aware of your core values, that really makes the job easier of choosing what you're going to do. So you may want to look at the PowerPoint about this and see that there are various kinds of ways to look at the the career choices you might make. So, for example, in the PowerPoint, I talk about people who are more realistic, who might be farmers, mechanics, and surveyors, and so on. And there are people who are investigative, who might be detectives and biologists and other scientists and so on. Artistic people, actors, interior decorators, musicians, people who are social workers, teachers, and therapists. Enterprising people, salespeople, politicians, reporters, small business owners, conventional people who are bookkeepers and accountants and engineers. Who are you? Which one of those kinds of people are you? And I do talk more about, and won't here, but take a look at this in terms of the kinds of occupations based on the combinations of those things that you may have inside you, because you're not necessarily just one of those. You can be an artistic person and you can be an enterprising person. That's possible. Or an artistic person who is also social. That's an interesting combination too. So I talk about this. So people who match their occupations with their own personalities are much happier. They have a much easier road. All right. Now, as you may have noticed, men and women are different, and women are more likely to have truer, deeper friends with greater emphasis on emotional sharing. Men tend to have relationships in which they share activities more, yes? So they exchange useful information when they have conversations, not necessarily emotionally laden, deeper ones. Men are less likely to share weaknesses. Men are less likely to ask for help. And they seek practical solutions to their problems rather than trying to get sympathy or empathy. Male relationships are also more competitive than females. All right, now, I do talk a lot about, in the classroom, about the way in which love develops and the different levels of relationships that we can have. Okay? And what I like to tell you very simply is that all relationships have different components attached to them and different ways of navigating those relationships. They require different dynamics and different inputs from you. So every kind of relationship is different in those ways. And this is something that many people have a hard time learning. What I would have told you in greater detail was about trust, understanding that trust is critical in this life stage, and to make this easy to understand, simply remember that when you are someone whose words and behavior match over time, this is a primary place to develop trust. One should not trust someone without a history of seeing that behavior matches words. That's a primary place for trust building. Okay. We tend to be attracted to people who match us in different ways. It's called the matching hypothesis, therefore. We tend to want friends who are more like us, and we want to have people who are at our level of physical attractiveness, who have the same sorts of core values. Those are all sorts of things that we look for and we're attracted to. That's a good thing, because matching means you're going to have less conflict in those relationships. Okay? Now, we've talked about attachment in infancy, and it could be said easily that an individual's interest and ability in finding true intimacy with friends and partners is really dependent upon the nature of attachment achieved in infancy. And if the attachment process was not a secure one, then hopefully we've had ameliorating events that have occurred to deal with those as things have moved forward. And if you had a secure attachment, then there are some things that could aggravate that, events perhaps. And we hope those folks also get the kinds of help that they need. But attachment is critical in terms of your expectations for finding partners and friends, because attachment forms an expectation template. Okay, so let's leave it there, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.